Good morning and welcome to the Home Affairs Select Committee. I apologise for starting slightly late this morning. We've got two panels in our final session on fraud. The aims for this session are to examine the UK's response to fraud and the impact of serious fraud offences and fraud against the public sector, to understand what the government is doing to combat the scale of fraud in the UK, and to examine the effectiveness of the government's counter-fraud policies, including the fraud strategy and the economic crime plan. We're also very mindful that there was a fraud summit that was held earlier this week, and we're looking forward to hearing about that. Can I ask our witnesses this morning to introduce themselves? Mr Fell, would you like to start first?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm Simon Fell. I'm the MP for Barrow-in-Furness. I'm the Prime Minister's anti-fraud champion, and I guess for clarity and completeness, I should say I'm also a member of this committee, and I've recused myself from this inquiry.
Thank you. Cheeseman.
My name is Mark Cheeseman, and I'm the Chief Executive of the Government's new Public Sector Fraud Authority, which works with government departments and public bodies to better understand and increase the impact of our action against fraud in the public sector.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Effgrave. I'm the Director of the Serious Fraud Office, which is a national organisation that's designed to combat serious and complex fraud, bribery and corruption, usually international bribery and corruption.
Thank you. Perhaps if we could start with you, Mr Fell.
Indeed.
In your role as the anti-fraud champion for the Prime Minister, could you just give the committee a flavour of where you think we are now in terms of fraud, whether the government is finally taking fraud seriously? There seems to have been a very long delay in getting a fraud strategy out. So could you just give us a flavour of what your take is on that?
So I think when you're in a situation where you have such a prevalent crime as fraud, it's 38% of all crime at the moment, we're clearly not in the place we need to be. And the fraud strategy is a recognition of that. You know, we need to change the way we approach fraud, what we do to pursue fraudsters, the way we look after victims, the way we make the system work better together. And everything in that strategy is about delivering the sort of changes we need to make the system work better. There's a huge amount of work coming out of that. I'll rattle through the sort of key points in it. You mentioned we had an international summit yesterday. 70% of the fraud that we see in the UK has an international component. We are not ever going to be able to answer the question of how we deal with fraud if we just focus on the UK. We need to get data shared across countries. We need to get law enforcement working together so we can better pursue the criminals who are actually causing these harms. But at the same time, we also need to bring industry on board. So 10 years ago, before I was an MP, I worked in fraud prevention. 10 years ago, we would have never talked about bringing social media companies into the conversation. Actually, as we've heard in this committee, a good amount of the fraud that is committed in the UK begins or is perpetrated across these social media platforms. So getting them round the table, working with them, getting them sharing data, helping law enforcement, better protecting victims, allowing them to users to report fraud on their platforms. These are all key outcomes of the fraud strategy and part of the online charter which we've managed to get over the line with a good number of these companies. We're improving the victim response. You know, we've got the National Fraud Squad now, so 400 officers in post. There'll be 500 by the end of 2025. All of this is about changing the dynamic on fraud. And despite the fact we've got all this great work going on, if you look at each of these pockets in isolation, they'll make a small difference to the bigger picture. I think the learning is there is no one silver bullet to this. It is about an entire systems change. And the fraud strategy, I think, is a really good step towards that. But when we deliver all the actions in it, that's not it, job done. Fraudsters innovate, they look for holes in the system, they look to exploit wherever they possibly can. So we have to keep iterating and working together. And it's about finding new partnerships, finding where the next vulnerabilities are, and then changing the system again and again and again.